It's Monday, the 11th day of April, and we're in the year 2022. It is rolling on. And as the year rolls on, never a dull moment. There are always some issues that we need to go beyond the headlines. And this evening, we're taking pensions beyond the headlines. That has been one of the major talking points on the island in the last couple of weeks. On March 29, there was a major stir when we got reports and wind that the court had issued a ruling. And this evening, we will dissect that. We have a panel that is second to none. And let me introduce our panelists this evening. I'm starting in studio. We have a former accountant general. He's a retired banker, smiling and looking ever so youthful. I don't know why he thought he was eligible for retirement. 26 and 3/4 years. Mr. Richard Duncan, it is great to have you. We have the Public Relations Officer of the Public Workers Union, Ms. Daisy Hazzard. Daisy, it's great to have you.
Thank you, Odette. It's wonderful to be here again this evening with you. Yes.
And we're using the virtual platform as well. And on the virtual platform, we have Grenada's Attorney General, Ms. Forrester. Ms. Forrester, good evening.
Good evening.
And we also have Ms. Rhonda James. She's the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Public Administration. Rhonda Jones. Rhonda, forgive me. I have a very good friend who's Rhonda James, and so that's why we got mixed up, but it's Rhonda Jones. Rhonda, it is great to have you. Always smiling.
Thank you, Odette. Good evening.
And I know I will not be fooled by the smile because and if you're hearing our feedback, that's Daisy in the studio giving trouble trying to quiet her phone after getting in here late already. Daisy, we'll have to put you in punishment corner. Silence that phone, please.
It's your GBN sent me your link.
Oh, I see.
I'm trying to silence
the link, Daisy, so we could get going. And we have with us as well Mr. Ewart Layne. He's a former member of the People's Revolutionary Army, People's Revolutionary Government in the latter stages. He's now an attorney. Mr. Layne, it is great to have you. And I know I will not be fooled. What the hell? I can't seem to come out. All right, so let's take a commercial break so that Daisy can sort out her phone issues.
It's
and
done.
We'll come right back.
Done.
Angie, don't you know that you should not fly kites near electrical poles and wires? You should only fly it in open areas. If the kite gets stuck, it can cause power outages throughout the village.
Then I'll just pull it down, Johnny. Simple?
No, you shouldn't do that. You can get shocked. You should call Grenlec at 237 and they will come and help.
Alright.
Never fly kites near the power lines. If your kite ever gets tangled, do not attempt to remove it on your own. A message from Grenlec, energizing our Grenada.
A whole new level of convenience and comfort awaits you when you shop at Rise and Shine Supermarket and Hardware Supplies, Griffin Lane, Grenville. Convenient, because we are open Sunday to Sunday. We're even at your service on public holidays. Comfort, because we are easily accessible to the physically challenged. Free Wi-Fi is available while you shop, and bags come at no charge. Everyday low prices and excellent customer care. Adequate parking available. We supply everything you can possibly think of. Family and home supplies, fresh meat, vegetables, and personal care products. All brands of cooking gas at affordable prices. You can send in your order, have it pulled, or pick up express.
And welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. We're looking at the pensions issue, and we have already introduced our panelists. So let's start this evening with the Public Relations Officer of the Public Workers Union, Ms. Daisy Hazzard. Daisy, what is all of this about?
Well, Odette, there is no all of this. Listening audience and viewers, there is no all of this. What it is that, as our Prime Minister would have said ahead of the 2018 elections, a modern society, a civilized society, must provide for its seniors when they get into retirement age. And the state of Grenada is an employer, just as every other employer in this country. And every employer, according to the Labor Act, must provide a gratuity and or a pension for its workers. So every company in Grenada, every household, every home that employs a maid, a cook, a gardener, Hubbard's, Grenada Cooperative Bank, Republic Bank, every institution that you can think about that is employing people provides a pension for them at the end of how many years or when they get to their retirement. Likewise, the government of Grenada is also an employer. It employs members of the public service, and there are about 5 components: police, prisons, teachers, public servants. So 4 components. The state is an employer of these persons, and so therefore the state must provide, not just according to the Labor Act, but also the 1958 Pensions Act of Grenada, that the state must provide a pension for seniors, for persons when they get to pensionable age. So there is no all about this, and there should not be any all about this. What should have happened all of these 38 years, and in the last 20 in particular, or perhaps since 2012 or even before that, the state of Grenada should have resolved what is now today the pension issue.
Okay, so should have resolved, and that is an issue that we will try to work through this evening to resolve. Let me ask Mr. Duncan a quick question. As former accountant general, I'm certain you know the public service rules. Based on the public service rules, and as particularly the Pensions Act, are all positions in the public service qualified for a pension?
Well, I think there are pensionable positions on what we call a permanent establishment. So that has to be, understood.
Okay, and I want to also toss that question to the Attorney General. Attorney General Forrester, as far as you are aware, are all positions in the public service pensionable?
Good evening again. And the short answer to your question is no, all positions are not pensionable. Insofar as we are looking at the pre-constitution pension legislation, there are a list of pensionable officers in all of the respective acts that are under consideration. And just so that we are nice and clear in terms of which acts we are looking at, that would include the Pensions Act, the Pension Prison Officers Act, the Pension School Teachers Act, and the Police Pension Act.
Okay, Daisy, so how can you justify and qualify your opening salvo where you're saying every Tom, Dick, and Harry is entitled to a pension when, based on the research that I did, as the AG just asserted, that not every position is pensionable?
So Odette, let's go back, because we cannot and should not use inflammatory language like every Tom, Dick, Harry, because it is not every Tom, Dick, and Harry. The laws of Grenada, in so many different components, lays out who are the public servants that qualified. The laws of Grenada lays this out. There is nothing that we need to go back to the drawing board to fix, because it is all there, it is laid out. Persons who are in the service right now, that I'm working with, that civil servants are working among, and retiring today, and would have started in the service prior to 1983 or 1985, the cutoff period, are receiving their pensions. There's no quarrel about it, there's no question about it, nobody has to wonder how to do it, because every single provision of the law that governs it.
What we're dealing with is the fact that there are some pensionable positions, right?
Yes.
It's not every public officer.
It's not every public officer, no.
Okay.
So but there is no query about whether or not it's every public officer, because again, all of the laws and the caveats and all the regulations that governs pensions for public officers, it's there.
Okay, great.
Yes, it's laid out.
We know you're passionate on the subject, and we'll get to all of those. Let me just ask Ms. Jones if she can itemize for us, for instance. We want to lay a foundation for the discussion. So, Rhonda, as far as we're hearing about pensions, and we're hearing about age 60 when people retire, we're hearing about 26 and 3/4 years. Can you take us through 26 and 3/4 years? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Right. Good evening again, Odette. Good evening to your viewing and listening public. So we need to understand that each of the respective pension acts that AG would have itemized, each of them carries its own defined features. So every single pension plan in the public service
has its own unique rules that we need to apply to the issue of determining one's eligibility for pension. So, for example, Cap 233, which is the legislation that speaks to public officers in the mainstream public service. Let me just run through for you some of the eligibility requirements that must be satisfied. So there was the earlier discussion about a pensionable position, and we have to accept that one of the conditions that must be satisfied is whether or not a person would have been holding a definitive appointment in a position that is pensionable. And pensionable positions are contained in the schedule, as AG would have outlined. And I do want to mention at this point that because we were operating with the premise that the Pension Disqualification Act was a valid piece of legislation, the schedule of pensionable positions in the public service needs now to be relooked, because positions have been abolished, positions have been created over the years, and now we have to go back to determine whether or not positions that were created in the years leading up to this judgment, are these positions reflected? And if not, then the necessary steps would have to be taken to ensure that the schedule is updated to reflect positions that are to be deemed pensionable positions. Now, so first of all, that is one of the conditions. Then there are rules such as the minimum service requirement for pension eligibility. Now, across the different pension acts, the minimum service requirement is 10 years. We have early retirement provisions. Each pension act stipulates the conditions under which an eligible public officer can retire early. The pensionable salary, what do we use to determine your pension emoluments? Each act describes what we need to use to determine your pension emoluments. The pension accrual rate is standard across two of the acts. It's 2.5%, but there is variation for junior police officers and prison officers. The maximum pension payable, that is standard across all of the acts. That's 2/3 of your highest salary. The gratuity element, that is standard across all of the acts as well. It's 25%. The factor gratuity, 12.5%, it's standard across the board as well. And whether or not a gratuity is payable, if you have accrued less than 10 years of service, that too is standard across the board. So the bottom line here, Odette, is that each pension act prescribes the features, the conditions that must be met in order to determine the eligibility of a public officer for the payment of pension.
Okay, and we would have to dissect a lot of these intricate details as the public gets a full understanding. I want to come to Mr. Duncan, but before I come to him in studio, I want to go to Mr. Layne, who has joined us virtually. Mr. Layne, one of the major factors in this whole discussion, debate, has to do with the National Insurance Regulations of 1983, the NIS having coming to force on April 4th, 1983, and then there is the Pension Disqualification Clause, Article 47, which we will look at. People want to know, what was the thinking of the People's Revolutionary Government when it set up the NIS? Don't forget to unmute yourself, Mr. Layne.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Thank you for having me once again. And may I start on a point of clarification? You introduced me as an attorney. I was trained as an attorney, but I'm not an attorney. I just want to clarify that. You can also consider me a chartered accountant because I am one. Regarding the NIS, prior to 1983, the only employees in Grenada who, as a matter of law, were entitled to a pension were public officers. And as far as I'm aware, outside of the NIS, that remains the case. Public officers outside of the NIS are the only employees in Grenada who are entitled to a pension as a matter of law. More than that, the pension that public officers are entitled to is protected under the Constitution. by a deeply entrenched clause of the Constitution. What the PRG sought to do by introducing the NIS was to broaden the pension base to ensure, as Ms. Hazzard was saying, that every working person had a pension upon their retirement. That's what the PRG wanted to achieve. And it was not something that was unique to the PRG. It was really part of a post-World War II movement. It was spearheaded by the ILO. It was done across the Caribbean, introduction, first of all, of the Provident Funds in several of the islands, followed by the NIS. And under the Gary regime, you had the Provident Fund. It was very limited. And all that the persons who were entitled under that fund received was a lump sum, or they were entitled a lump sum upon retirement. However, the NIS came in now to seek to give pension to all workers. So every employer in the country by law had to make a contribution to the pension of workers.
Okay.
Now, so that was the NIS. I don't know if you want me to stop there or if you want me to go on to the Disqualification Act.
Sure. So we will visit the Disqualification Act shortly, but I want to ask Mr. Duncan. Mr. Duncan, Ketanji Brown, when she was being confirmed and she was grilled through the confirmation hearings, they kept asking about her philosophy. As a former accountant general, what was the philosophy of pensions and what was the atmosphere, the mood of workers who knew I can work for 26 3/4 years and become qualified for this pension?
I think the thinking was to ensure that you built an organization with professionals who were committed to doing the very best for the employer, which is the state of Grenada, knowing full well that they have certain protections. For example, no indiscriminate disciplinary action, no dismissal at the pleasure of a minister. You have strong rules and regulations that you follow to build a strong, credible public service that is key, for building modern democracies and so forth. And obviously, at the end of it all, you retire to ensure that a certain measure of dignity, a certain measure of stability, and you are able to ride out your evening years, with a sense of pride and honor, knowing that you have served country to the best of your ability.
And as you crunch the numbers, how costly would you say pensions are as far as looking back to the public service?
Well, I'm unable to put a number on it, but as far as I'm aware, governments comfortably paid pensioners. There was no sinking fund. I think that even without computers back then, people knew when folks were retiring and it was nicely programmed. So there was no issue. And another great feature that they had also is that you could have joined, and I think you could still do it now, join broken periods of service. So for example, if you work for 5 years, and you left the service for whatever reason for a year or 2 or 3, and you come back and you work for another 10, 15, 20, you could have joined those periods of service and consider it continuous for pension purposes. So I think that the colonial masters, if you may, modeling the public services in the Commonwealth Caribbean off of the British system had in mind that professional cadre to help educate the people in teaching service. They were respected, they were honored throughout the community. The policemen were respected and honored throughout the community, and the general public servants, and they did their work without fear or ill will, and got their pensions at the end of the period of service.
Okay. I want to ask the Attorney General, before I go back to Mr. Layne, so we had the Hermelin Armstrong case, and then there was an Irvin Mcqueen case. Can you briefly take us through both cases to lay the framework for how we got to this point?
Okay, sure. So I will start with the Irvin Mcqueen versus the Public Service Commission case. That was a case that dealt with Section 84(8) of the Constitution and what should happen when there is the abolition of an office or reorganization of a department and a public officer would find himself at that point in time without a job. The Constitution makes provision in Section 84(8) for that public officer to be deemed as having been retired and to be eligible for pension benefits as if they had retired from the service. You would find that what happened in relation to Mr. Mcqueen was that on the abolition of his office, is the court, or at least he found himself in a position where there was no pension scheme in place to account for him on abolition. The Pensions Act, Cap 233, makes provision for what happens on the abolition of an office and what pension benefits ought to be paid to such an individual. But with the Pension Disqualification Act coming into force in 1983 and removing that from the provisions of our laws, on Mr. Mcqueen, his office being abolished, there was no mechanism as a matter of law to account for how he should be paid a pension on that abolition in keeping what the Constitution provides for. So you would find the Court of Appeal, in considering the Mcqueen decision, would have found that the Pension Disqualification Act, to the extent of the invalidity, insofar that it has removed the only laws relating to the abolition of an office to provide pension, it was pretty much constrained to be where it's at. The Hermelin-Armstrong case is different to the Mcqueen case in that the Hermelin-Armstrong case, and I think this is the fact that persons overlook when they discuss the Hermelin-Armstrong case. That case accounted for what happened when Ms. Armstrong joined the service, and I think she joined the service, it may have been in May 1983, but don't hold me on the exact year. And within that time when she joined, and before that law was actually gazetted, she would have found herself in a situation where the law was having some form of retroactive effect to her detriment, which must not happen. So if she joined the service in May 1983, and this law was only gazetted in October 1983, for instance, it meant that you had to account for officers between that period of time in terms of what happens to them, right? And Ms. Armstrong was one of those persons that fell within that period. So even though the Armstrong case touches on the Pension Disqualification Act, it was in a different circumstance that Ms. Armstrong's case arose, and not one that's identical to the case at hand now. The case at hand now is actually much broader in that it was looking at the Pension Disqualification Act in the context of all of the pension legislation and not solely in relation to Section 84(8) of the Constitution. It really focused in on Section 92 of the Constitution and the effect of the Pension Disqualification Act in relation to those provisions in the Constitution.
All right, and now let's go back to Mr. Layne, and then I'll ask Daisy a question based on Mr. Layne's presentation. Mr. Layne, let's deal with the disqualification. We looked at the philosophy of the National Insurance Regulations to provide pensions, but there is this clause that deals with disqualification.
Okay. Actually, it's a separate act itself. It's People's Law number 24 of 1983. And may I say that the Pension Disqualification Act was passed to prevent exactly what has happened, exactly the crisis that has arisen based on the recent decision from the courts. The Pension Disqualification Act was intended as a temporary measure so as to provide a cutoff. Because what was recognized is that people who were in the public service at the time the Pension Disqualification Act was passed, notwithstanding the correct point Ms. Forrester made about the retroactive effect. But what was recognized was that once you entered the service, the law that applied to you, the Pension Act that was enforced at the time you entered the service, is what you carried throughout your career as a public servant. In other words, whatever you meant there when you entered you were entitled to receive pension based on that law when you reach retirement age, unless something that was an improvement on what you meant was passed. So recognizing that, the NIS came in, so the government had to make contributions to the NIS because the NIS law required that public officers, government employees be treated in the same manner as persons in the private sector. So government would have been making these contributions in the NIS that was not made before. So they'll be making these contributions now. And unless you had a cutoff point, what would have happened is that exactly what has happened now, namely, you would have had to make the contributions to the NIS and at the same time pay the same pensions under the 1958 Act and the equivalent for the prison officers, the police officers, and so on. So what was intended was to have this temporary measure, so you have this cutoff, but at the same time, the NIS Act contained a provision, with two provisions, Section 46, but more importantly, Section 47, which mandated the minister responsible to do certain things, either to modify, to wind up, or whatever it is, so as to provide for public officers. So the expectation and the intention was that you have this temporary measure, so you have this cutoff, and then you have the reform in the exercise of the power under Section 47, so that for public officers joining the service after 1984, the combination of whatever was provided in the after that power was exercised, plus the NIS, the expectation is that public officers who joined the service from 1984 would have been in no worse a position than they would have been if the NIS was not passed. That was the intention. And I think the case of Mcqueen and the recent case both made the point that the legislative intention of the PRG was not carried to finality, because the power that the minister was supposed to exercise under Section 47 was never exercised. And that's why, to me, to the refrain you hear from on many occasions that it is the PRG and it is the Pension Disqualification Act that has caused all of this problem. To me, it is really a passing of the buck. And I say so because when the PRG passed the laws in 83, the Pension Disqualification Act was passed in September 1983. The PRG collapsed and the revolution was no more. The demise of the revolution took place in October 1983. So that was 1 month after the Pension Disqualification Act. In 1985, the government of Grenada validated, the parliament validated the many laws passed by the PRG, including the Pension Disqualification Act. If it was a problem at the time, the new parliament had the opportunity to, they had to repeal the Pension Disqualification Act, it was not done. In 1987, many people missed that point. The 1985 law was considered and by the government of the day there were certain defects of the 1985 law. That's the Validation Act. So in 1987, that law was repassed into, for want of a better word. So in 1987, they had the opportunity again. The Mcqueen case, that was a clear case of the court sending a signal to the powers that be. You need to put this thing right. Mcqueen was one person. Only one person was affected by that decision. That was 25 years ago. So it was a clear case. The court was saying you need to put this thing right. The Chief Justice at the time said the legislative intention has not been brought to finality. And that was the basis upon which he deemed, that was the basis upon which he formed the Pension Disqualification Act to be unconstitutional, because he said you have to read Section 47 of the NIS and the Pension Disqualification Act, you have to read them together. And when you read them together, the intention was that the PRG intended to create new employment conditions for public officers joining the service after 1984, but nothing was done. Then you had the Armstrong decision, which was about 2009, that's 13 years ago. Again, nothing was done. So what has happened is that this problem has now come upon us due to all of this inactivity. So that's why I say we have to understand that history, and we have to understand that the pension disqualification act was intended as a temporary measure to bridge the gap, to move from one system over to a new system.
So, Daisy, I'll come to you shortly, but staying with the Disqualification Act and looking at the Mcqueen case, let me ask the Attorney General here. In the Mcqueen case, the abolition of his post was the main contributor or the factor of consideration. So, isn't this creating a possible loophole for the government, a possible ground for appeal?
So, in terms of the Mcqueen case and the factual basis of that case, you would find that in the judgment that we have now from the High Court, the judge indicated that he was constrained because the Mcqueen case, though it dealt with the abolition, it also touched on the application of the Pension Disqualification Act. And with the Court of Appeal being a more superior court, he found himself constrained to say that I must follow the direction the Court of Appeal has given in relation to the status of the Pension Disqualification Act. And I think it's perhaps useful for me to make the point that whilst we can speak of this as being a matter from 1983, probably 85, 87 onwards, that has probably just been that has not been resolved in a timely manner, it would be too easy for us to disregard that throughout that period of time, several efforts and steps have been taken in a meaningful way to address in a substantive form the issue of pension in Grenada, and particularly in terms of ensuring, insofar as you're looking at public officers, that there is possibility for an additional pension scheme to be applicable. Because whilst we have pension on the NIS, which is what every Grenadian worker is entitled to, and I think when Ms. Hazzard speaks about our labor laws, it's really from the NIS actually making that reference in terms of the obligations of an employer, because I am not aware of every employer in Grenada, for instance, having an additional pension scheme available for the employees other than what the obligations are on the NIS. But of course, I stand to be corrected in relation to that issue. But I think it is that you have this additional concept that is existing in our laws in relation to public officers, and having to treat with that and treat with what scheme can be introduced, because you have what is a non-contributory scheme coming from prior to the Constitution. And you will see generally in more modern times, all of these schemes in relation to pension have been contributory schemes, meaning that both the employer and the employee contributes to it. And I think that is a thrust of what has always been the difficulty when looking at the pension laws of Grenada and what scheme may or may not be used.
And so, Daisy, I want to come back to your opening point. You want to put on record, clarify your point about every person being entitled to a pension. Were you referring to the NIS provisions, or?
Well, Odette, I don't know that I want to clarify anything at all, because we've had the Attorney General speak, and I stand corrected by her in-law. What we know is that most employers, reputable employers, you're asking someone to join your organization and to be a part of your professional team, you're going to say to them, we have a medical plan, we have a pensionable plan, or these are some of the benefits that can accrue to you as a worker if you labor in our vineyard and build our organization. So there is hardly any reputable organization or employer in this country that is not presently offering this to their employees. I belong to a union organization where I volunteer my time, but the 9 or so permanent employees that we have there, the union takes care to pay into a pension scheme for them. So in fact, we have someone who retired on the 18th of March of this year. She received a pension benefit that the union paid into through an insurance company to her. So whether that is prescribed in law across the board for every employer or not, this is the practice, as Mr. Duncan would have said to us before. But what we know for a fact is that the laws of Grenada provides for a pension for civil servants.
And you're dealing with the pre-constitutional period as well as post-1983 through the National Insurance Scheme.
Today, Odette, we are governed by a constitution. So we cannot be talking about whether we are dealing pre or post. We are governed by a constitution. If we are going to try to pick
implement 1958 provisions.
Absolutely. So if we were to pick that apart and say we should abide by this section of the Constitution, but ignore that section of the Constitution, then we cannot do that. We have to abide by our Constitution. And constitutionally, pensions are provided for. Not only that, you have had 3 judgments, 1998, 2009, now you have 2022. Every single case, every matter in whatever permutation that has gone before the court as relates to pensions for civil servants, those who qualify and are eligible in whatever ways they are, the court has upheld it. The Constitution provides for it.
Mr. Duncan, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to segue into the debate because I think there are certain takeaways that the public should be left with, because this is a debate about public servants, and we come to the NIS. And people must realize that with NIS alone as a retiree, you are in dire straits. If you are lucky, half your NIS going in medication. If you are lucky. If you are not lucky, more than half going in medication. Then we're talking utilities, transportation, food, medical care. It is not sufficient. So people have to also look after their own financial affairs while they are young and boisterous and strong and so forth. And you also have the employer who has to Daisy's point, come up with a credible plan. In most instances, if not all, it is what we call a defined contribution plan, where you put in, the employer put in, and so on. So really and truly, we have to discourage people from believing that NIS upon retirement can take you through the rest of your life in a dignified manner. It can't.
Right. And I want to go over to Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones, the point was made about inactivity. I believe it was a point made by Mr. Layne, and now we have Daisy referring to cases of 1998, 2009, and now 2022. Inactivity. Can you tell us what has the government been doing to try and resolve this matter? We heard one of the alterations being that we're now in a crisis situation. What has the government been doing over the years to bring resolution to this matter?
All right, Odette. Actually, the government has undertaken a series of meaningful steps in addressing this matter. Let me just go back to the Armstrong Judgment. Now, the Armstrong Judgment was actually the trigger that would have allowed for the inclusion of 66 retirees who would have fell between the period of 1983 and 1985. The point at which the Validation Act was the date on which it was adjusted. We had 66 retirees falling into that catchment area, which we then had to restore their pension rights in keeping with the provisions of 58. Now, the restoration of that amounted to $8.8 million. That was done, and to date, these 66 retirees are receiving their pension emoluments as the law prescribes. So that was actually the first significant move that the government would have made in addressing the issue of pension, restoring pension rights to persons who would have carried that right based on the law. Now, following this, the government in 2016 would have declared pension restoration and reform a strategic priority. And it was at that point, just coming out of structural adjustment program, the collaborative effort was made to engage the labor movement in a series of conversations on addressing this issue. And Odette, I want to state this categorically. The best way, and perhaps the only way in which we can actually address this problem is through a negotiated solution with the labor movement. Because the fact remains that these rights are provided for in law, and any move to make any adjustment to what is in essence part of the terms and conditions of service, we must have consensus with the labor movement. So that being said, a series of conversations was started. In 2017, the government would have commissioned the establishment of the Pension Secretariat, and we would have launched our Pension Restoration and Reform Project. We began a massive data collection effort. We set up the pension database, and today the pension database is still functional, and the Pension Secretariat is still functional because we have continued to encourage ongoing registration with us because we were preparing for any eventuality, because this matter could have gone any which way. So taking into consideration the fact that we needed to prepare for any eventuality, because this is a complex public policy issue, and it had to be resolved, whether it was with a restoration of the rights as enshrined in law, or with the introduction of a new scheme with the minister acting on his powers in Section 47 of the NIS Act. And so I distinctly recall that in 2017 as well, what the government did was to set up the Pension Engagement Committee. And that committee consisted of representation from persons across the sector. This was not a government-only committee. And that Pension Engagement Committee was charged with the responsibility of engaging in talks with the labor unions in an effort to reach a consensus on what meaningful action we can take under the priority of pension restoration and reform. Now, Odette, in 2018, that talks culminated with a memorandum of understanding. And that memorandum of understanding essentially laid out the principles on which the issue of pension restoration and reform would be tackled in a collaborative approach. Now, the first principle that was enshrined in that MOU was that all persons would be eligible for a pension once you had a definitive appointment on or after 4th April 1983. Now, that's very well understood because we would have subsequently adjusted the date to 22nd February 1985. Now, the second principle was that all eligible members who stand to receive a pension from the government, that benefit shall comprise both of a Government of Grenada contribution and your NIS benefit. So we agreed that the second principle in this understanding was that the benefits afforded to public officers would now be a combination of benefits contributed by the government on top of the benefits that you would be receiving from the NIS. Or that principle was the genesis for the introduction of our advance payment policy, right? Now, this advance payment policy came in, and we would have, as the policy advisors, worked out the conditions under which this policy-approved program would be initiated based on the understanding that we had reached with the unions. Now, let me say this here. Now, in the discussion with the unions on how this policy was going to take shape, talks broke down on the issue of the gratuity and the demand that was made for the upfront 25% that the law also makes a provision for. So when that would have happened, government would have then decided that given the protracted nature of the legal system in dealing with some of these issues, we cannot just allow the whole issue of income inadequacy to just fester, right? Because we were very well aware that persons were coming forward and they were sharing their stories. They were telling us how difficult it is post-retirement. They have commitments that they are not able to make. The NIS benefit is just inadequate. So taking all of these things into consideration, the government would have then gone ahead and launched the advanced payment program.
Rhonda, if I could interject here, Rhonda, for a brief moment. I just want to sound a note here. We need to take a commercial break. I don't want to break your flow, but quickly, Daisy, 30 seconds. She's just alluded to the fact that, things are progressing nicely. There was a memo of 2018, the pre-election, on the eve of the election, as some people like to call it. But then your unions come and put a spanner in the works with this gratuity payment that you are demanding. Let's take 30 seconds on that, and then we take a commercial break and continue. I want to come to the cost of this, and I want to have...
Odette, I don't know if you're doing it deliberately or if you just do not have a real appreciation of the facts. The union put no spanner in the works. The law provides for a 25% gratuity. The law provides for that. The 2018 memorandum was signed under the premise and the understanding that pension was restored. And unions honorably went ahead. And in fact, I was at the union hall. I was not a member of the executive at the time. And I said to my union leader, sign for 70%. Although I know the law provides 100% for me. So no, the unions placed no spanner in the works. The law speaks. It is 25% gratuity. What the government of the day has to do and had to do in 2018, when you budget and you make provision for everything else, all the imperatives, the financial and economic imperatives of your country, gratuity and pensions for your workers who are eligible is also part of that imperative.
Mr. Accountant General Former, we hear her and we know that there is the moral obligation.
It's not a moral obligation, it's a legal obligation.
Legal obligations. Crunching the numbers though, don't you think maybe you might have agreed with the government? Let's see if we could reach each other halfway, 3/4 of the way.
Well,
which the unions did at 70%.
You see, and I have not studied it in any great detail, but I always pondered on whether or not the unions can negotiate away
we cannot.
A right that is enshrined in law and in the Constitution. In other words, my understanding is that the Constitution states clearly any law that replaces the existing one must leave the public officer retiring in no less a favorable condition. So when you go and you start to negotiate away my rights, then I believe I have a case to take before the court as an individual.
As we go for the, sorry.
So I'm just saying, and again, I'm not a legal counsel, right? My training is in public administration and other things, and that's how I see that particular issue. But pension reform, which you'll come to, I'm sure, is a must. But pension reform has to be constrained by the provisions of the Constitution as I understand it. I could be wrong.
Pension reform, no doubt we will come to, but we must take a commercial break, pay some bills, and we'll come back. We'll talk pension reform, we'll talk about the cost of pensions, and obviously we'll go back to Ms. Jones, and I want to hear from Mr. James, Mr. Layne. I don't know why, Mr. Layne. I would want to hear from him tonight on that whole issue of the thought process, and when he looks forward all these many years later, what he's seeing, his thoughts on that. Stay with us on Beyond the Headlines.
Total is one of the world's largest oil companies with a top quality line of lubricants. Total Lubricants has a full product line from passenger cars, motorcycle, heavy industrial equipment, mining, trucking, agriculture, and manufacturing machines and vehicles. Total Lubricants, winning championships in motorsports, including Formula One and World Rally Championships. Total Lubricants are available at all Rubis service stations, leading automotive shops, and distributed by Huggins.
Have you heard about the new Softweave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Softweave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue, available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Softweave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
When you need your prescription filled or you require non-prescribed medication, supplements, or all your personal needs, visit Gittins Healthcare at locations on Wall Street, Grandans, Victoria Street, Granville, and Central Deputy Street, Wharf. Gittins Healthcare aims to provide an exceptional personalized pharmacy experience. Additionally, children under 5 and adults 55 years and over will enjoy 10% discount on purchases of $20 and over on prescription medication. Stop settling for less. Visit Gittins Healthcare, where your health is our priority.
Here is a little known fact. There is only one place in Grenada that you can get an MRI scan done. That place is Spicile Imaging Center. Yes, Grenada, that's the truth. Other centers could offer you other scans, but Spicile Imaging provides an authentic MRI scan. Here's another little known fact. Spicile Imaging has 3 centers. We operate at Grenville, the Carnage, and at the Ocean House, Grandlands. We provide the widest range of laboratory tests and services. CT scans, x-rays, mammograms, ultrasounds, and a host of other services. We are fully staffed by a team of family doctors and specialists. Call us today at 444-7679. or 406-1500, or visit any of our 3 locations. Spicile Imaging, from seeing the doctor to getting lab tests, scans, and pharmacy services. We are here to take care of you.
If there was ever a time to keep and stay healthy, it's now! We at Hills and Valley are here to help you take deliberate steps to maintain your health. We stayed true to maintaining the most comprehensive rates while stocking the widest range of medicines and health devices, including personal protective equipment. There are so many benefits shopping with us. You get great savings through discounts for senior citizens and reward cards for loyal customers. Ask about owning yours today. Visit us at Halifax and Grenville Street, St. George, Jubilee Street opposite the Grenville Bus Terminal, and at Hillsborough, Carriacou. Our wholesale distribution on Halifax Street also stocks the widest range of pharmaceuticals. We are with you on the hills and in the valleys. We are Hills and Valley Pharmacy.
When a loved one passes on, we all need the comfort, support, and guidance of a trusted friend. You can rely on LaCour Brothers Funeral Home. We provide a personalized professional service that exceeds all expectations. Our dedicated staff responds to your every need with the greatest detail, ensuring affordability with a variety of options. Our upgraded state-of-the-art facilities, spacious air-conditioned chapel with live internet streaming, a modern, environmentally safe crematorium, the only of its kind on island, private viewing spaces, large on-site repast center, a modern transportation fleet. Join our burial society today and make personalized arrangements for that final moment as you prepare to enter your loved one into eternal rest. Visit or call LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and select a package that brings added comfort to the entire family. LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and Burial Society, continuing a tradition of excellence.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use use clean, renewable energy. Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you. During these times, we are facing the same obstacles, changes, and no rules to get through it. We had to find the power from within, pushing limits and conquering every training session to ignite our minds and give our muscles the fuel they need. Powerade Advanced Iron 4 formula with its flavors, Mountain Blast, Fruit Punch, and Jagged Ice gives you fast hydration after sweating because of its 4 electrolytes to go the extra mile. Powerade, feel the power.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. This evening we're looking at pension and public officers, the real issues. Our panelists this evening, Attorney General Dept Forrester, Ms. Daisy Hazzard, Public Relations Officer of the Public Workers Union, Ms. Rhonda Jones, she is the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Public Administration, Mr. Ewart Layne, former member of the PRG, and Mr. Richard Duncan, he's a former Accountant General and he's a retired banker. And we like to call him Economist, put a big handle by his name. So we have looked at some of the foundation and how we got to where we are, and Ms. Jones was looking at the whole issue of pension reform and the efforts made by the government over the years to get people to a point where this matter could be resolved. Mr. Duncan, pension reform is critical, I'm certain you'd say.
Well, absolutely. I like to make the point that while we are debating and trying to resolve this issue, the public worker who joined the service last Friday has the same pension rights as the person who retired today. That is a very significant point, because whatever reform comes about cannot be retroactive. So the faster we bring in a modality that takes care of the issues that the current system seem to have, the better for everybody. And I think the PS made the point that it has to be a multipartite negotiation. And my main admonition is that that negotiation is constrained by the provisions of the Constitution, as I understand it, with respect to people having a pension arrangement that is no less favorable than currently exists. I could be wrong, but if I am right, then we need to get to work urgently.
And so, Madam AG, we have Mr. Duncan saying if he is correct, and we understand that there's an issue as to whether payment of pension pursuant to 2 laws is in keeping with Section 92 of the Constitution, which allows public officers to choose which pension applies, for want of a better phrase.
Okay, so let me start where Mr. Duncan ended in terms of what the Constitution provides for in relation to Section 92 before I get to your query in terms of they having 2 pension laws present. The Constitution indicates that your pension on the date you join the service must not be less favorable. Any changes that are made to the pension law after you join the service cannot be less favorable. So let's say I joined the service in 1972. The Constitution came in and the government wanted to change the pension laws in 1990. They cannot introduce a scheme that is less favorable to me. I have to have the same benefits that I had when I joined the service. So it is not meant to create a scheme that is more favorable than what you currently have. Is that you cannot have a scheme that is less favorable than anyone who is working at the time right? When this new scheme comes into play, it's going to be something that's applied to persons in the future and not the people who are there at present. So Mr. Duncan is very correct in stating that every day that passes and the person joins the service, the pension laws that are applicable now are what they should receive their benefits based on. To get to your query in relation to Section 92(3) of the Constitution, there is reference to there being to what happens if there are 2 or more pension laws available. Now, we have not had the benefit of any court considering the proper application of that section insofar as there may be several types of pension laws available. So let's look at NIS, for instance. We have NIS making provision for pension, but NIS, of course, makes provision for things far greater than solely pension. You get your invalidity benefits, sick benefits, and a series of other additional things. But you make a fixed contribution on a monthly basis as an employee, likewise as an employer. And out of that contribution, when you reach the retirement age, you get a certain sum as a pensioner, right? Then if they introduce into the laws, for instance, something that runs concurrent, and they indicate, well, as an employee, you have to choose which pension scheme you want to benefit from. Do I want to benefit solely from NIS? Do I want to benefit from this new pension scheme that's coming in? The law may be designed in such a manner that you make a choice, and the Constitution says in Section 92(3) that whichever choice you make, that choice is deemed to be more favorable to you. Now, some persons may view a scheme that provides for more than just pension as something that's more favorable to them, and they may opt to participate in that type of scheme. But it's a little bit difficult to give you a definite answer in terms of how Section 92(3) may play into the scheme of things, because we do not at present have a law that says you have to exercise that option, right? And let's say, for instance, we look at what we have now in terms of the pre-constitution pension laws and NIS. If a court was to interpret that a public officer has to choose which pension scheme they want to participate in, then it becomes a question of what is the continued relevance of the NIS scheme, for instance. That I can't imagine persons probably opting to go to NIS and not wanting the pre-contribution pension benefits. But in that same breath, if you were to give up NIS, all of the benefits you get, for instance, in sick leave, maternity benefits, and things of that nature, you would be foregoing those types of things. And I think that is why we continue to say it is not as simple as may start to implement what has taken place, but to navigate and see how that affects a cross-section of things and a cross-section of other stakeholders within the population on a whole.
Mr. Layne, if Morris Bishop was to just appear in front of us now and he listened to all of this seem to be a quagmire, what do you think he'd think? What do you think he'd say? You're muted, Mr. Layne.
See, for reasons you may well understand, that's a difficult one for me. I can give you the benefit of my own experience, and with my training, I can give you the benefit of that. And what I will say, I mean, the Disqualification Act was drafted in 1983. And we learned from experience. We're speaking about almost 40 years later. Now, something I find very interesting is that I looked at the legislation in St. Lucia. And the legislation in St. Lucia section, I think it's 66 or 67. I actually pulled it up just now, but I don't want to take the chance of going to it. Let me see if I can. The NIS legislation in St. Lucia, it has exactly the same provision as our section 47 in Grenada has. However, there is one additional provision, which maybe if we had it in Grenada, it would have assisted. It says that whatever you do, you must ensure that the law is not applied in such a way so that persons affected shall have pension benefits which are less favorable than those previously provided under any enactment or any scheme. Now, maybe if we had that provision in our law, we would not have had the problem we have now. The situation would have been more clear-cut. But again, that's a matter of experience. The St. Lucia law is a 2005 law. I'm not sure if it was reenacted in 2005 or whatever, but I just make the point that in that 2005 law, you have those same provisions. I'm not sure what happened in St. Lucia. I'm not certain, but what I can just point out is that there is precedent for the way the PRG approached the matter.
Okay.
But if I may just go back, just give me 1 second again, 1 minute again. I just want to make the point, the very point that Mr. Duncan Richard was making just now about reform and the fact that if somebody joins the service now, they are entitled to the same benefits, to be treated in the same manner as somebody who joined in the 1970s, for example. I want to make the point again, that is what the PRG sought to avoid, recognizing that they had to be reformed. They wanted to have a cutoff point to give some breathing space for the reform. Because as Ms. Jones pointed out, you need at least 10 years to qualify for pension. So it meant that when the PRG passed that law in 1983, there was at least 10 years breathing space. And in most cases, it would have been 26 or 20 years breathing space to put something in place. Of course, it would have had to take effect from the 4th of April 1983, sorry. But that was the whole point. You have a cutoff, you have the reform, and the reform applies going forward to people joining the service after the cutoff date. The inactivity over all the years has brought us to this problem. I'm not casting any blame or anything so, because I know it is a very complex and difficult issue, but I just want to make the point that exactly what has happened is what the PRG was seeking to avoid. Okay. I don't know if that answers.
Thanks for the clarification. I want to go to Ms. Jones. She was making the point. So Ms. Jones, let's segue into the cost of this, right? I'm certain the government has started analyzing this based on the press statements that have been issued. Any hints at the cost and probably some of the options that you're looking at?
Right, Odette. So before I answer that question, I do want to make 2 points in relation to the previous contributions of the previous speakers. Now, in actuality, we do have situations in the public service where a public officer can make a choice between 2 sets of benefits and determine which one is more favorable. So the Teachers Act and the Public Officers Act 233, that presents a situation where a teacher can choose which of these acts would give him or her more favorable benefits. Similarly, we have the Special Pension Act 2003. Now, the Special Pension Act affords a public officer who would have received a definitive appointment to the public service post-83 to determine if he's eligible as well for pensions under Cap 233. That public officer can also determine which of these acts afford him or her more favorable benefit, and whichever one it is, then that is where he would draw the benefit from. So we do have situations existing in the public service that give a public officer a choice of determining where he or she can access their benefit from, depending on which one affords them a more favorable payout. Now, secondly as well, in relation to the discussion on the benefit, I just want to say this. The issue was never about whether you had a right. It was about the benefit. and whether the benefit was going to be deemed less favorable or more favorable than what currently existed. Now, I think this is where the room is created for a negotiated solution, because the issue here is we are not precluded from exploring various permutations of how the benefit can be provided. What has to be held sacred is the value of the benefit. And this is what the negotiation and the collaboration was about. How can we actually afford to pay out a benefit in ways that will not impose a fiscal burden on the state? And this is where we are now, Odette, because we're talking about costs. Now, from the very beginning, this discussion has always been about fiscal sustainability of the 1958 provisions, and by extension, the ability of the government to afford such pension plans. That has always been the crux of the matter. And so the discussions have centered around what various permutations can be explored to allow for the payment of benefits under a scheme that will comply with the rules that are existing. And I also want to say this. Now, the size of the public service today is not the size of the public service in 1985. The service has grown exponentially. Since then, a number of rules have been introduced to ensure that there is fiscal prudence in the management of the affairs of the state. And I really think that government should be given some credit for undertaking the rules to govern the way in which the fiscal affairs are managed. Now, the imposition of these rules are hard constraints, and we do need to accept this in any discussion. Now, the rules have been suspended as a result of the pandemic, but they will not be suspended indefinitely. So the issue of how can we sustain an affordable pension payment plan scheme will be the central issue on the table around which we have to explore the option. So yes, now when we would have embarked on the restoration initiative,
but PS, if I could interject here, before you go there, you're looking at sustainability, the size of the public service. Have you looked at the bill, how much this will cost the government? Have you crunched any numbers there yet? Because I want to ask Mr. Duncan a question before you go on to the point. Have you looked at numbers?
So we are in the process of analyzing the data, and this is just to ensure that when numbers are placed on the table, the numbers would have been arrived at on the basis of assumptions that the people over in the policy unit and the Ministry of Finance are tasked with deriving. Because not only do we now have a liability that has accrued for persons who have long since retired, and the first cohort would have retired somewhere around 2012. So that's the first cohort. So there's the whole issue of the accrued liability, the pension payments that will be owed to these persons who have already retired from the public service. Then there is the carrying cost for those who are still alive and who will now have to receive monthly pension payments. And then there are the assumptions that we have to make for the active employees who would be retiring 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from today. So the modeling has to take account of these three subsets of retirees and active employees that we have to cater for in the immediate. So that is why we are taking the time to ensure that we get our numbers right. So we have already compiled data on the exits from the public service. We are well aware of the monthly carrying commitments of the government in relation to wages and salaries. And now we have to take account of the persons who have since retired, because Odette, I must mention here that in our system, pension payments are indexed to salary increases. So every single salary increase cycle that would have taken place since 1985, we now actually need to go back and take account of the percentage increases and factor that into the cost for the payments to be made. Okay. So there is actually quite a significant administrative requirement on our end to get all of this data correct. And so our advice to the policymakers have been, give us the time to go through the data. Let us make sure that we factor in all of the variables. Let us ensure that we account for persons who are falling within the bucket that we are looking for. And let us ensure that the assumptions that we are deriving on which this modeling is going to be premised is accurate.
Right,
so we do not want to put a figure out there until we've done the work.
If I could just ask for pause and just is yes or no. I have heard the figure bandied about $1.2 billion. Has that figure been tossed around in government circles, yes or no?
No, Odette.
No.
The short answer to that question is no. I don't know the genesis of that figure, but that figure did not come from us.
All right. So I think I heard that from a government official and not just any government official in a secret place. I think I heard that pronouncement in a public space by a very senior government official. Mr. Duncan, I want to come to you, but Daisy, I think you wanted to respond to something here first. Mr. Duncan, I want to ask you about sustainability and financing of this.
Well, I don't know if I wanted to respond, but certainly I'm listening in as a public servant, and Mr. Duncan is listening in as a former PS and Accountant General, is it? Accountant General. And you know, I'm listening to Prominent Secretary Rhonda Jones, but I'm hearing policy. And I know that ministers of government are the ones who speak policy. So I am wondering tonight, and I'm thinking, I really do admire PS Jones because she has a fine line to walk. Because the role of the Prominent Secretary in our Westminster style of government and within is clearly defined. And it is not to speak on behalf of the politician. You understand? So we're listening in, and it's kind of like thinking, this is the Prominent Secretary. So there's a line, and somehow that line and that boundary seem to have been a bit mixed up tonight. And that's the kind of a feedback we were getting here. Yes, because certainly the pension has to be paid to pensioners from money. It cannot be paid from sand. The first batch of pensioners to have retired started, I think it was 2010, 2012. That's how many years ago, because we are in 2022. So certainly governments and administrations have had the time to sit down and create a framework within which, and within our budget, pensioners can be paid. The PS Jones made the very clear and factual claim that the public service of today, the size of it, is not what it was in 1958 or in the intervening years. But certainly, we are hearing of budgets in the billions now. It is not what it used to be in 1958. Our society has moved, our society has grown, our civil service has grown, our budget has grown. But if it is the case that the government, as an employee, cannot sustain and cannot pay pensions because of financial implications, why then are we hearing of Imani trainees again being taken into the service? So let's make it clear, Odette, based on all of the discussions that we've heard tonight, even from the PS, even from the Attorney General, persons who came into the service as Imani workers, many of them have made right now 9 and 10 years. They can claim a pension from the state. So the question is, how does a government continue to govern and not prepare and plan for and budget for paying pensions to its employees? And so to make the claim today about the state of the economy or the growth of the economy or the growth of the service, all of that is noise. None of that is responsible noise.
How can you call it noise?
It is noise, Odette, because it is noise, Odette, because the reality is government budget for agriculture, government budget for roads, government budget for schools, government budget for hospitals, government budget for every single thing that government has to budget for. Government also has to budget for the gratuities and pensions of its retirees. That's the fact. And we do not say government cannot put a budget for agriculture because it will be too much for the country. We do not say government cannot budget for roads because it will be too much for the country. We accept it as a responsibility of a responsible government.
Some people will put this squarely in the laps of trade unionists. And I remember Mrs. Gloria Payne Banfield saying on the Beyond the Headlines, Mrs. Payne Banfield, if I am misquoting, if it wasn't you, it might have been Miss Pamela Steele, one of them at a program here, said that the unions got themselves to this position. They had no right negotiating pensions with the government through the memorandum.
Absolutely. So what she's saying is not that the problem rests with the unions. We had no right to even begin to talk about negotiations because there is a law that provides for pensions.
So you take it that this falls squarely in your lap?
No, not at all, Odette. We cannot say that. If we say that again, Odette, we are coming back to a point where we are taking away any responsibility from government to budget for, to plan for, to prepare for, and to legally pay pensions. So when Ms. Gloria Payne Banfield said she's blaming unions, it's because she feels that we had no right, that unions had no right to even begin to talk about let's settle for 70%.
Because she was saying it was provided for enshrined in the Constitution.
That is the point, Odette. Thank you for understanding it finally.
Right, let's go on to Mr. Duncan. Mr. Duncan, P.S. Jones made the point about the size of the public service and fiscal sustainability. Your thoughts on this?
Okay, so let me start off by commending P.S. Jones and her team for the work that has been done with respect to restoration and reform and stuff like that, which is yet to come to fruition, right? But a database has been built and things are happening. She did say that we knew that this day was going to come. It has arrived. What has to happen, in my view, is a parallel set of things. So we have the reform to take place, and we have the restoration to take place. And just as how you have a secretariat with skilled, capable staff for the reform project, just so you have to have a skilled, capable, well-resourced secretariat for restoration. That's the public administration side. I think that P.S. Jones and her team can do that quite credibly. I believe that there are young, bright economists in the Ministry of Finance who are going to be modeling and doing all the iterations to see how this is going to come now. So the numbers are not yet known. My thing is that anyone who is retiring in 2022 should begin to get the pension and gratuity as per the law. Let's start there. And then you're back into the others who retired last year and the year before. You develop some criteria around which you're going to begin to pay these people. Some people are being paid now. So it's really and truly looking to see what ought to be paid and what has been paid, and really the difference they're looking for now, because they say some people are getting advance and all kind of different things were worked out. So you're not looking at a absolute quantity now, but a difference for such people who are already getting something outside of, the cap 233 and such like. Now, whatever the number is, that is a debt on the state of Grenada, a charge on a consolidated fund by virtue of the judgment. The question is, how do we generate cash flows to pay the arrears owed to pensioners? That's the question. But your debt to GDP ratio, for all intents and purposes, has already gone up. But no one has received a single cent. So my point is, generate the cash flows and start paying these people.
How can you generate the cash flows, Mr. Duncan? Borrow?
Well, obviously, if you have a debt, how would you pay the debt? You must be able to generate from those who have surplus cash to be able to pay the debt, and you repay them over time. That's what the state does. The banking system in Grenada and Eastern Caribbean Currency Union is flush with liquidity. There's a thing we use in the banking system called your loan to deposit ratio, right? Of the deposit you have, how much have you lent out? A 25-year or more look at this thing shows that it is the lowest it has ever been over that period of time. The level of liquidity in the system, right, is extremely high. So high, so high that you would know, Odette, that if you had a fixed deposit 12 years ago, you could have gotten 4 or 5%. Today you're getting point something of a percent, if at all. Sometimes it's 0. So I'm saying that given the liquidity in the system, the government has an opportunity. This problem has met the government at a very nice time when you take a historical view of it. And there's a chance to take a bold, transformative approach to the resolution. So apart from borrowing, and again, the economists in finance will model, what to read and that kind of stuff and so forth. But you also have another opportunity that when you pay these arrears out, you can, as government, at the same time, put a large chunk of your Grenlex shares on the market. The money will come back to you. You have this asset here that you say belongs to the people. And then you have where people could sit at the dinner table with their grandchildren when they receive a dividend check and explain the connection between the light that they're able to study with, the current that the computer run with, and the dividend check that they get by virtue of owning these shares. So in other words, there's an opportunity for intergenerational transfer of wealth. And this is how, in my view, among other things, we should take into account in looking at solving this unique problem that has met us at this time.
Solving this very unique problem that has met us at this time. This is Beyond the Headlines. We're looking at the thorny issue of pensions and public offices, looking at the real issues this evening. We're at about 28 minutes after 9. It tells us that we only have 2 minutes remaining on the program in regular time, but unfortunately, this is not an issue that we can cut off at 9:30. We will have to go up until 10 o'clock this evening. So we will take a commercial break and we'll come right back. And I'm certain you want to weigh in on the discussion. You can call us at 440-1252, 440-1252, but not before we delve into some further issues. I have 2 questions that I want to raise with the Attorney General and also with Mr. Layne, and there's some follow-up that I'm certain Daisy's going to jump in on with her very passionate discourse. We'll entertain those after the commercial break.
Introducing the Grenlex mobile app. You can now get your bill balance and easily track energy usage for your home or business. Report and receive alerts about power outages. Plus, stay up to date by receiving the latest notifications. Yes, the Grenlex app keeps you connected anytime, anywhere. The Grenlex mobile app. Download for 24/7 access.
Get Rubigas. Get cooking. Rubigas, clean, safe, and reliable LPG is the perfect solution for your commercial and everyday needs. For cooking at home or barbecuing, choose Rubigas LPG cylinders. Available in a variety of sizes from 20 to 100-pound cylinders. Rubigas LPG, clean, safe, reliable. Are you cooking with Rubigas?
Get Rubis, get going.
Imagine having the home of your dreams. Imagine investing in that piece of property you can call your own. Imagine finally doing that home improvement project you've always been thinking about. It's time to stop imagining and start doing. Let the GUT Credit Union help you take the first step with fantastic rates, affordable repayments, and reduced legal fees. Make the move. Get better terms on your mortgage. Use your home equity to make those dreams a reality. Act now. There's really no place like home. GUT Credit Union. It's where you belong.
Have you heard about the new soft-weave bathroom tissue with Total Hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Softweave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue. Available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Softweave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
The Nawasa app brings the power of Nawasa's customer service experience to you. Instant, conversational, and smart. Easy access anywhere. Get bill balance, transaction history for up to 6 months, report a fault, link to websites, view payment centers, contact information, push notifications, and multi-tenant accounts, all in a secure login platform. Like a self-service concierge app, mobile.nawasa.gd gets you the support you need much faster. Available on both Android and iOS platforms. Mobile.nawasa.gd, your customer support companion. Nawasa, committed to meeting customers' needs.
When a loved one passes on, we all need the comfort, support, and guidance of a trusted friend. You can rely on LaCour Brothers Funeral Home. We provide a personalized professional service that exceeds all expectations. Our dedicated staff responds to your every need with the greatest detail, ensuring affordability with a variety of options. Upgraded state-of-the-art facilities, spacious air-conditioned chapel with live internet streaming, a modern, environmentally safe crematorium, the only of its kind on island, private viewing spaces, large on-site repast center, a modern transportation fleet. Join our burial society today and make personalized arrangements for that final moment. As you prepare to enter your loved one into eternal rest, visit or call LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and select a package that brings added comfort to the entire family. LaCour Brothers Funeral Home and Burial Society, continuing a tradition of excellence.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. This evening we're looking at pensions, public officers, the conundrum that the country has found itself in. And I want to ask Attorney General Dear Forrester, we're looking at the financial implications, but if you could just reiterate for us, what are the legal implications of this? We have issues of who is covered, who is not covered, that kind of thing.
Okay, sure. So just in terms of what are your immediate legal issues, it is that you have the obligation to start to make pension to individuals who have already retired. That's an immediate obligation that the state has, and if that obligation is not met, those individuals have several legal steps they may or may not be able to take. You have to consider the eligibility criteria of various individuals, not solely whether or not they were in a pensionable office, but individuals who may have left the service not at reaching the retirement age, but may otherwise be entitled to certain benefits that those pensions legislation provide and allow to be payable to them. Those are some of our consequences, of course, and we have to consider as individuals. Other individuals have already mentioned how you treat with future public officers and making provisions for those payments. And this is something that essentially will be at bay for perhaps the next 37 or so years. When you look, for instance, at the Pensions Act, Cap 233, you would notice that it references 2 years within that act. It has an appointment date, I think it is of a day in 1950, and it has an earlier date of 1935. So they essentially accounted for what was that period between 1935 and 1950 for when this legislation, which we refer to as the Pensions Act, Cap 233, would come into effect. So you find in terms of anything we have to do going forward, we're looking at what can happen over essentially a full generation of persons. Because when I think of 37 years from now, I hope I may still be around and healthy, but it may or may not be the case.
Okay. Mr. Layne, looking at the legal implications and looking at solving this, if you reach back to some of the suggestions made by Mr. Duncan, what are your thoughts on the way forward?
Well, it's more, the court has ruled, and unless there is an appeal and the judgment is varied, the law is clear in terms of what is required. I think it is just a matter now of how you meet those obligations. And I agree with what Richard has said, but there are other ways, you know. So, for example, I'll just give one alone. Education benefits, for example. The life expectancy in Grenada now is very close to 75. The retirement age is 60. Most people want a career change, maybe in their late 40s, 50s. The issue of education arises. Education is expensive. It is something the state can access. So that may be one way in terms of using education benefits to meet some of the obligation, not only for the individual who you have a liability to, but maybe to their children. That's just what I did.
That's so. I'm certain you're taking notes. There are some suggestions being presented to you. Probably Beyond the Headlines will send her a bill for that, right? That was only a joke there. So we have a caller on the line. Caller, good evening and welcome. Producer, caller still there? Seems like we've lost the caller. So a reminder that you can contribute to the debate and discussion this evening. 440-1252, 440-1252 is the number that you can call. The caller is back. Caller, good evening. Hello. Okay, so we're not hearing that caller. Mr. Duncan?
You know, while we wait on the call, again, Council made a very important point about education, and that's one of the arguments that we make when we say that pension benefits have strong economic and development spin-off, because the pensioners with their pension would be able to better feed their grandkids, the nutritional well-being improves, they can learn better, they can excel in school, you could finance the education, and as a matter of fact, I think the pensioner with his or her money would make a better choice of educational institution and courses than a government scholarship. So again, to me, the bigger and better deal is to have people make those independent choices, you know, as economic actors in the system. But again, all ideas are up for contention as to how it is we can go forward.
Okay. Daisy, one of the comments made recently about dealing with this and how will the government deal with it. We heard P.S. Jones talking about sustainability, which is important. We have another caller. Caller, good evening. I hope you can hear us, and we hope that we can hear you on this side at this time. Caller, good evening.
Good evening to the panelists, and good evening, Mrs. Best.
Good evening.
Yes, I just calling to chime in and based on what you said a while ago. When you said if Bishop should appear now, what would he say? You asked the gentleman what would he say? But you forget Mr. Hobart Blaze. You should have said also if Mr. Hobart Blaze should appear now, what would he say? Because when he didn't have the money, the Prime Minister of Works that time said, he have it, let him pay. Now, let him pay. He has to pay. And not only that, where they are getting money to pay retiree ministers of government after 4 years, after 2 terms in office, where they getting the money? Just how they getting the money, they have to get the money and pay the people the money. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Daisy, we were going on to the point. Excuse me. One of the comments made is something to the effect. To meet this responsibility, all Imani workers will have to go home. It will cause cutbacks in the public service. Agricultural initiatives will have to be cut back. Is that what trade unions want?
Odette, again, it's not about what trade unions want. All of the things that you've spoken about there, we would have heard that coming from, I think it was the Prime Minister, because I heard that statement as well. Everything has to be planned for, everything has to be budgeted for, everything has to be catered for within the ambit of the economy. So the idea of trying to put brother against brother, pit mother against daughter, pit citizens of this nation against each other, and trying to make out or making comments and statements that would seem to suggest that pensioners, state pensioners, are trying to take something away from somebody else, that is wrong. That is wrong, Odette, because nobody is trying to take anything away from the other. Before there were Imani workers, they are civil servants, established public servants, provided for under the Constitution and according to the PSC rules and regulations. We have Imani workers now who also should never be Imani workers, because there is nothing within our public service rules and regulations, nothing within this laid out within the state that calls for any worker to be indentured, and I'm using that word, into the public service for years on end, earning pitiful wages. No benefits can come to them, no foreseeable career path, and call that a decent livelihood or a decent work, which is what government and administrations should be seeking to provide for its people. So to try to pretend or to say to someone who is now an Imani worker that a civil servant is taking something away from you, that is wrong. That is a false premise. If I was given the opportunity to retire today, if P.S. Rhonda Jones were given the opportunity to retire, because I'm certain she probably is at the age of early retirement, just as I am, if all those civil servants within this public service now, who have come to the majority, can receive their gratuities, we can exit out of the service. Those unfortunate Imani workers can now step into established jobs, decent jobs with decent wages, with career paths. They would not have to be called an Imani. They could be called a corporate communications officer, or a PS, or a clock 2 typist, or a clock 1 finance officer. They would not have to be called an Imani officer or an Imani worker. And so let us not continue to try to pretend that public servants who have earned their pensions under the law is taking anything away from any other Grenadian in this state. But all of us are deserving.
The fact is, we're looking at the cost and what will be the cost of the cost.
We factor in the cost for every single thing in this country, including the newly acquired bunch of Imani workers. We have to factor in pensions for public workers. It's as simple as that. We cannot be talking about the cost while we are doing everything else. We look at the spending of government. We look at the imperatives, and we look at the things that government chooses to do on a day-to-day basis. They also have to choose to pay pensions and gratuities. It's as simple as that. We cannot continue in 2022, after the historic Glasgow judgment of March 22nd, 2022, talking about the cost to the state. The state has to buckle up now and sit down and say to the Grenadian people, this is my implementation plan. Fortunately, P.S. Rhonda Jones would have outlined to us tonight that her office, Department of Public Administration, has been doing work since 2016 towards this day, against this day. So we're in a good place. We've learned that tonight from P.S. Jones, that we're in a good place within this state to begin to implement and pay workers what they're legally owed before they die.
Okay, Daisy, let's stick a pin here and take a caller who's been very patient. Caller, good evening and welcome.
Oh, a person, good evening.
Yes, please.
I have been listening very carefully to this interesting discussion, and I was wondering if it would be a better thing for government to increase the pension age so that the financial burden that they are experiencing now would somewhat be lessened. I mean, there are people on the panel who can rest this statement, and let me hear you. Thank you.
You want to jump in on that?
Yeah, but of course, that's one way of making the situation manageable, and obviously we're subject to negotiations, and there are a number of issues that the unions will take into account, because your retirement age is part and parcel of your terms and conditions at the time that you are contracted. That said, I want to segue into Daisy's, treatment of the issue of cost. Now, there is undisputed evidence, uncontested evidence, that pensions are a key part of your economic strategy. In other words, without pensions, you have a cadre of people depending on the state. You have a cadre of poverty-stricken individuals. I mean, those days are long gone. The economic benefits of pension in terms of improving the safety and security of the elderly, as we spoke about, sending the kids to school, starting small businesses, spending the money in the stalls and so forth, driving entrepreneurship, investing in enterprises and so on, uncontested. So there are great, what would I call, growth propelling and growth inducing benefits to be had. What is occurring now at our historical juncture is that you can have a massive injection in your economy. The benefits will be extremely significant. However, there are things we need to do to make sure that we manage it well and that the outcomes are positive and, what would I say, transformative is one of the better words to use.
Great. And we have another call on the line. Caller, good evening.
Hello, good evening, my dear. I have two questions for Ms. Hazzard. Yeah, I have two questions for Ms. Hazzard.
Go ahead.
I want to know if it would be fair for persons employed in the government and other services to pay into a pension plan, thus making it easier for people, for government to pay pension going forward in the future, right? Another question is Hazzard. As far as I can remember, persons have been paying money into the union coffers from the beginning of time. What's the union doing with those persons' money? Are they going to be, or do they pay pension to persons who are retiring at the end of their service? And if not, how you are going to approach it, seeing that government has to be paying pension to everybody? And remember, you say that everybody's supposed to be getting pension. I know it happens in foreign countries. Is it going to be happening here with the unions also? Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I'm really happy for your questions, and I'm quite happy to answer them. One, at this stage, at this stage, I know that what every public servant wants to see, and what our country wants to see, is the implementation of pensions for persons who are deserving of it legally. There has been a lot of talk. There has been a lot of attempts to negotiate. There has been a lot of attempts to come to solutions over the years. I remember as a very young worker, I think it was around 1995, 1997, very young, when I became aware of this whole issue of pensions, and I even then didn't understand what it meant to be a senior because I was young. I would have said to my union, why can't we consider a participatory scheme where we pay into and government pay into, so that when it's time to retire, it takes a lot of that burden off the state because you would have prepared for that day. But I'll tell you what, Odette, I cannot do it as a worker. What would have had to happen is that we would have had to have the will of government, a principled administration that sits at and said to unions, let us do this thing properly. We've had governments that have instituted under law pensions for themselves. We do not have a case where politicians retire after working with the state of Grenada and do not receive pensions. We do not have a case where politicians, after 4.5 years of service, when that election bell rings, does not receive a gratuity. Right now, we are hearing about early election bells. When that bell rings, every single politician will receive a gratuity from the state of Grenada. So nobody is questioning politicians' pensions and gratuities. We're giving it to them them willingly. But what we want to see now, what everybody wants to see, and if you listen to this panel tonight, it is a stage for implementation. As to what workers, as to what unions may be prepared to negotiate and to talk about going forward, that will be another day. But as for now, because of all the dishonor that has been attendant upon this pension issue with the administration, what we want to see is implementation. Let me answer the second question.
Wait, hold on.
Yes.
I'm not allowing you to answer the second question because the person was asking about what the union doing with its dues. Tonight we're talking about pension and public office.
I'd like to answer quickly.
We have a call on the line and it's coming up on 10 o'clock.
All right.
Overtime in the game already. Caller, good evening.
Hello, good evening. Good evening to your panelists. I'd like to make a statement. Governments over the years should have made provision year on year for this contingent liability. A contingent liability is a liability that may occur depending on the outcome of an uncertain future event. A contingent liability is recorded if the contingency is likely and the amount of the liability can be reasonably estimated. Governments over the years had dropped the ball on that. A contingent liability for pension should have appeared every year in the provision of estimates and expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Madam AG, somebody has sent a question in on social media. Good night, Odette. Just want to ask two questions to the AG. Is the PDA legal? I'm not certain what PDA means, but I'm certain you would understand that lingo. And is the NIS a pension plan or a scheme? And finally, the debt owed to Grenadians due to the pension issue, thankfully, is a debt to Grenadians. So we have that submission there. Ms. Forrester, I hope you can...
Firstly, on the Pension Disqualification Act,
PDA.
The decision of the court, that's what PDA is, that's what the person is referencing when they say PDA, the Pension Disqualification Act. The Pension Disqualification Act has been deemed unconstitutional to the extent that it has removed pension for officers beyond, I think it's 1980. Of the 4th of April 1983, likewise the 22nd of February 1985. So it's not just the PDA, but there's also an amendment of the pensions legislation that amended all of the 4 pension laws that that was referenced in the decision of the court. The second question, can you remind me what the second question was?
Is the NIS a pension plan or a scheme?
Right, so I don't think there's really a fundamental difference in terms of a pension plan or a scheme when you reference the NIS Act. But the NIS Act makes provisions for age benefits, which is what we refer to as pension insofar as you're dealing with the NIS Act. And it is a contributory scheme, meaning both the employer and the employee contributes towards it. And that is the state pension that comes out as a result of the Constitution. When the Constitution makes provisions in Part 4 for all workers in Grenada to receive a pension, the NIS covers that constitutional obligation. So whether you're working in the private sector or you're working in the public sector, NIS provides pension for individuals in keeping with the Constitution. And there was a third question.
I think it was more of a statement. The person is saying, finally, the debt owed to Grenadians due to the pension issue, thankfully, is a debt to Grenadians.
Okay, so that's probably really a statement and not a question because I can't decipher that one.
Thanks. Mr. Duncan, you want?
No, I don't understand the question.
Okay, good. So thanks to the person who submitted this, and probably it was just a statement more than anything else. We are on 9:54. We have to wrap it up. Certain that there are several other persons who would have liked to chime in on the debate, but we've gone the full course and half hour. So as we get ready to wrap it up, can we lay the ground rules that we only allow in 30 seconds for closing comments? All right, so P.S. Jones, we have not heard from you for a while. We're getting ready to close tonight's deliberations, and you want to leave the public with what thoughts?
Yes, Odette. So I just want to say at this juncture that the way forward, again, requires a negotiated solution. Articulating the constraints is simply giving due recognition to the constraints within which this issue must be objectively analyzed in order for us to begin to arrive at possible workable solution. We have to stop treating this issue as if it is a zero-sum game, winning and losing. It is not. It is actually far bigger than that, because it goes to the very heart of the fiscal management of our country and the liabilities that have been imposed on it and the ability to continue to afford such a scheme. There is no debating about the responsibility that a government has to secure the socio-economic well-being of all of the citizens. So I think we have to move past whether I win, I lose, this is my right, this is not my right. We actually need to simply lay the bare facts on the table as they are, acknowledge that this issue will be dealt with within the context of some rules. And those rules are meant to ensure that we are all protected, that we are not unnecessarily burdened in ways that make it difficult, not just for us, but for the future generation as well. So I am simply saying that as we go forward, we need to objectively analyze the issues and be prepared to consider alternative options for how we can effectively resolve this issue once and for all.
Thank you so much. Mr. Layne, your closing thoughts this evening.
Well, I just want to say, that the court has ruled, and the government does have a right to appeal. It's up to the government to decide whether that right is exercised or not. If the government does not appeal and if the judgment is not varied, then the challenge is for the country to discharge its obligation. We are where we are. I don't know if there will be any benefit in terms of trying to cast blame for this one and that one. Government is a continuing business. The state has the obligations, and I think if all Grenadians are mobilized and we deal with this thing in a very civil way, solutions can be found. Opportunities, as Mr. Duncan was saying, do arise out of what is a crisis. I believe there is a way out that we can all come out stronger as a country out of this.
Thank you so much. Madam Attorney General, will the government be exercising its right, or is the government contemplating exercising its right to appeal?
Present, the government is focused on resolving the issue and figuring out how it can deal in a meaningful manner with the financial, in particular, implications of the decision, likewise the contingent things and consequential matters that arise as a consequence of it in relation to all stakeholders and the Canadian population as a whole.
So you're not commenting on whether you plan to appeal?
No, I can only comment on what is the focus of the government at present.
Okay, great. Madam PRO of the Public Workers Union, your closing thoughts?
Well, it's very heartening to hear from the Attorney General and the PS Jones that government is looking at and is focused on how to go about paying. And what the unions would want to say to the government of Grenada and to the people of Grenada is that the right to pensions for public officers has been restored. Let us uphold the law. Let us honor our Constitution, and let us find workable and practicable ways to look after our pensioners. Persons are starving right now as we speak. Persons are dying right now as we speak without their legal benefits. And it is time that we put this question to rest. The court has spoken. There's been enough backing and forth in squabbling what the unions have done, what government has done. It is now up to this administration, now in this moment, to begin to immediately pay pensions to those persons who have retired without it and are living hand to mouth every day, and to begin to look at workable solutions as to how we can go forward, sustaining the paying of pensions along with every other economic imperative that government has to face.
Thank you so much. Mr. Duncan, your closing thoughts this evening.
Yes, Odette. I would like to say that it may seem to take an eternity, but the chickens always come home to roost. What is before us now has to be handled properly. We should proceed with a spirit of love. We should proceed with wanting to see people do better, want to see people empowered, and there are positive effects, benefits economically. The country will do very well once the government finds the resources to pay, or raise the resources to pay. One caveat: it's a judgment. A liability has been established. It is going to be quantified. The question is whether or not the 6% interest accrues on that liability the day of the judgment or from the day that you have owed those pensioners. If it does, you are better off to raise the monies at less than 6% and pay up, because the chickens will come home to roost.
The chickens will come home to roost. The closing words from our former Accountant General, Mr. Richard Duncan, retired Managing Director of the Grenada Cooperative Bank. And Mr. Duncan, you were also with the FROC, the committee?
Yes, I had the honor to chair that committee for about 2 or 3 years.
Okay, great. At this juncture, I'd like to say a very special thank you to our panelists this evening. Ms. Dia Forrester, Grenada's Attorney General, Ms. Daisy Hazzard, Public Relations Officer of the Public Workers Union, Ms. Rhonda Jones, the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Public Administration, Mr. Ewart Layne, former member of the People's Revolutionary Government, and of course, Mr. Richard Duncan, as we mentioned. Thank you very much to our viewers and listeners, to those of you who were able to chime in on the discussion. We thank you for your input. Those of you who were just following along at home, in the car, wherever you are, those of you in the diaspora, we especially thank you for tuning in every Monday evening. I'm Odette Campbell. We'll see you again following Monday, because Monday coming, it's a holiday. We have Good Friday coming up, Easter Monday, so please be safe and be careful. Continue to keep yourself safe. Remember, COVID is not out of the window, it's lurking around, so still remember the protocols that we have followed for the last 2 years, although there has been the easing of the restrictions, really. So thanks to the entire production team here at the GBN, and to all of you, God bless you. So long for now. We see you again on another Monday. I'm Odette Campbell. Over and out.
Join GBN on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. for Interesting Grenadians, a program that showcases the lives of interesting and outstanding Grenadians at home and abroad. It's Interesting Grenadians every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. on GBN. Don't you miss it.